Hi everyone, welcome back to Race to the Top with me, Oki Alazi. Today we welcome Claire Linney, who is a queen of marketing, especially in the beauty space. We'll be talking about pole dancing, about writing children's books, and how difficult it is to work for a founder. I feel enlightened having listened to Claire, and I hope you will do too. I How you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. And the aerial.
Yes, there's. I was going to say circus stuff, but that sounds like I'm a juggler, or it's basically.
Can you juggle?
Yes, but not like fire.
All
like
right.
Just standard,
just standard three balls.
3 apples at a kid's party juggling.
Not 3 balls of fire.
No, not
All
3
right.
balls of fire. But it's basically aerial is exercising upside down in anything from like a round hoop or like a large piece of silk, for example.
Yeah. So you can do all of them: the hoop, the silk, the pole.
I did pole dancing for 8 years, actually.
Well,
and
maybe we shouldn't talk about that on here.
Yeah,
Have you told anyone about that?
That was the gateway into circus for me.
All right. I was wondering where that was a gateway to. I was like, where are we going with this? We're very early in this podcast episode. So, okay, cool. All right. Well, nice. Maybe I should look it up. So, let's talk about you a bit more. And I'd always like to start with going right back, as far as you really want to go. It's up to you. I always sort of say, what was it like growing up? And I know you grew up in Hampshire, right?
Yes, sort of a Hampshire-Surrey border. So
Hampshire-Surrey border.
A small village.
That sounds very posh and very nice. Was it?
It was it's very much Barber-wearing, golden retriever walking country. So
Right.
it's lots of villages. It's within commuter distance of London, though. So lots of people. So my dad worked in London. We
Okay.
lived in a small village.
What did your dad do?
He worked for IBM for 30 years. Don't ask me what his job title
That's
or
all
what
right,
he
'cause
actually did.
No child ever knows what their parent does, right?
Something to do with computers.
Which is it's a good guess, seeing as it's IBM, right?
Yes.
You know, something to do with computers. Well, let's go with that.
He's going to be very disappointed
Let's
when he
go with
listens to
that.
this now.
Yes.
So yeah, no, growing up was good. It was a very it was a very nice village. I had a really comfortable, very privileged upbringing. We used to go to pubs for Sunday lunch. We had a golden retriever ourselves.
All right.
My parents had barber jackets.
Oh wow.
We listened to Radio 4. I had a very British middle class upbringing, I suppose.
So how did that work out? Can you tell me a bit more about your ethnicity and how you came to be?
How I came to be. So my mum was actually born in Lagos in Nigeria.
Wow.
And I think, which was not uncommon at the time, her family were quite well off. And if you had money in Nigeria, you sent your kids to boarding school in the UK.
Yeah.
And my mum was the eldest of 13. So when she was 4, which is kind of crazy
Wow.
young, was put on a flight, sent to the UK and sent to boarding school. And then quite a lot of families were kind of paid to look after her in the holidays. So she had a very culturally British upbringing, didn't go back to Nigeria very often, didn't see her parents a huge amount. And my dad, on the other hand, was born in South Shields.
Right.
So is white, is British, and then they met in Cambridge. And I guess many years later, I was the result of that meeting.
Oh wow. That's cool. So very. Even though your mum is Nigerian, does she consider herself Nigerian?
Yes, but I think it's complicated for my mum. I think this is the complicated part of our sort of family. And I think because her parents disowned her when she got engaged to my dad.
Oh wow.
So they haven't...
Because she's from South Shields.
Well, no, I don't think...
That's harsh.
It is harsh. And also, he'd been living in the South. He's quite Southern, my dad. Like, he moved down South when he was quite young.
Yeah.
In fact, that's a whole other story. In fact, when he started... My dad is very, very bright. When he started at grammar school, because he had a northern accent, they assumed he was stupid.
Right.
And they put him in the bottom set for everything until he lost his accent.
Oh wow.
Which
Regardless
is interesting.
of how he did it.
Exactly,
Wow.
yeah. So anyway, that's a whole other sidebar. But so yeah, my mum's parents, I think, expected my mum to go with their wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe it's a cultural thing, but my mum was supposed to be a doctor or engineer, which she wasn't. She was supposed to marry a man that they approved of, which she didn't. And I think it was especially because she was the eldest in the family.
Yeah.
That was seen as a a betrayal. So my mum's family weren't really around when we were growing up, but they hadn't really been around hugely for her when she was growing up either.
Yeah.
So she's had much more of a British influence in her life than she has a Nigerian one. But I think because she was born there, she would still say she's Nigerian by birth, certainly.
Yeah. And how did that affect your connectivity to your heritage?
It's quite a complicated one. I think it made it quite difficult growing up because I didn't feel Nigerian, and it almost felt false of me to almost even claim that identity, because I was like, well, I don't
You
know
are
it.
Meghan Markle.
Yes. Well, my brother has this terrible joke that we're not Meghan Markle white, but we're not Stop and Search. No, we're not Meghan Markle black, but we're not Stop and Search black. We're somewhere in the middle. And so it was almost like I felt a bit conflicted about telling people I was Nigerian, because for me, Nigeria was the culture that had disowned my mum. And also there was a very negative portrayal of black people in the media, in film, it's not like you had fantastic role models. No. So, and there were a lot of dodgy money scams being run by Nigerians in the 1980s. So I just had
and
this
90s,
and 90s, but there were no positive associations with Nigeria as a country for me. So it was something I felt quite difficult about claiming. And then also there was that feeling of not quite feeling black enough.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I grew up in Surrey. I listened to Radio 4. I don't know anything about the food or the culture. So I almost felt like I had to kind of qualify my blackness.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I didn't feel like I was the black that was being shown to me, if that makes sense. So it's been quite a complicated thing to sort of reconcile myself with as an adult.
And how was that? Well, as an adult, but also probably, you find yourself when you go through school, and I'd imagine in where you were, that was still mainly surrounded by people who didn't look like you.
Oh, completely. I mean, my mum used to joke we were the only blacks in the village. I think, when another mixed race family, I remember her coming home one day and she was like, there is another black family in the village. We are no longer the only ones. And that felt like quite a thing. I think it's still very much like that. So my secondary school was 1,000 kids, and there were maybe less than 10 of us that weren't white, maybe 4 of us that were black.
Wow.
So it was very, very white. But I think in a way, there's been bizarre benefits to that to me, in that because I grew up in such a white space and I was very used to being in white areas, it's something that doesn't faze me now because it's just like every other space I've ever been in.
Yeah. I had something similar, and people sort of say about imposter syndrome, but the thing is, you don't feel it because that's what it's always been like, right? So when it's always been like that, then you do, if you're in a room full of white people, you go, is that strange? You go, no, just what I'm used to.
It's complete. And I think it definitely helped me at university. It helped me when I started work, because it never occurred to me that someone wouldn't listen to me or that I couldn't raise my voice, because the environment that I was in just replicated my upbringing. So I sometimes feel there may be things that I have lost through not having that connection to my culture and my heritage, but also it has benefited me in ways as well.
Okay, well, we'll return to that. I mean, so school and university were very much places where you existed in an area where you really stood out. You really just you. I mean, did that in any way feel strange? Oh, we talked about it, that it didn't feel strange, but at any point did you think, hang on, I am the only black person around here? Sometimes.
It used to come up more to do with things like hair. And I know actually for black women, hair is always a very big topic.
Microaggression warning.
Exactly. It's almost, and I've even read things that have suggested that almost your hair is almost a bigger signifier than you're black sometimes than the colour of your skin. And if you think about the sort of the comb test I think they used to do in South Africa.
What's that? I don't know about that.
It was basically if you put a comb or a piece of paper in your hair and it fell through, it meant that you were light enough skin to be considered coloured and have certain privileges.
Okay.
Where if the texture of your hair was more coily and the comb got stuck, they were like, no, you're black. Right. And then certain privileges would be denied to you. So there is this sort of culture of the texture of your hair being a really significant indicator of race. And I think I was very aware that my hair was different. Like all my friends had long, straight. I just wanted long, blonde, straight hair.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest indicator to me that I was different.
Yeah.
Was that my hair was different.
Yeah.
But I remember things weirdly that I used to have friends at school who would say things like, oh, but we don't even think of you as black. We just think of you as really tanned.
Yeah.
Which there are problems with that as a statement
Yeah.
that I can unpack now. But at the time, it was sort of, I guess, an indication of my assimilation, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
You're just, because it's about belonging, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so I think what you're saying, and I definitely experienced this actually, you felt like you belonged, even if you looked different to other people, you felt like you belonged.
Yeah.
And weirdly, in growing up in South London as I did, sometimes I encountered more racism in a very mixed environment of black and white people than in one where I was the only black person. I mean, have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's when suddenly something. So one example was, I remember there was a club in Guildford called Bojangles, and this was in the 90s, so like clubbing was
Great name for a club.
There were 3 clubs in Guildford, and Bojangles was one of them. And I think they used to have this night where they'd kind of have R&B upstairs.
Yeah.
And one of my friends wanted to go upstairs and dance to R&B because we were like, we like the music. And I remember going upstairs and being really shocked because like 60% of the people upstairs were black. And at that point in Guildford, I was like, I've never seen this many black people in one space in my life.
Yeah.
And then I suddenly felt like I stood out because I was like, I've never been in a space where there's been lots of black people. And it was really interesting because the guys we were with suddenly felt very protective of us girls.
Yeah.
And they didn't want us to go upstairs because they were like, but it's full of black guys and we don't know how to keep you safe. And part of me was like, okay, so I'm finding it weird myself being in this space, but I'm also getting irritated at your reaction that somehow the white guys downstairs aren't a threat to us, but the black guys up here are. And I remember that really bothering me at the time, especially as I was well, my brother could be up here and he's a black guy, so how do you feel about him? But I was kind of 17, so I don't think I really had the language to unpick that or challenge that at the time.
Yeah.
But it did make me really uncomfortable.
I mean, it's an important point, isn't it, around how people say, well, I know someone and they're black, so that means I'm not racist because I know someone. But actually, sometimes that person they know is just someone they know, right? And sometimes their reaction to people who are black, who they don't know, is completely different to the one that they would have with their friend.
Yes, exactly.
They've almost gone beyond the colour of the skin. They've just become their friend, yet they still feel threatened by someone who looks like the same sort of thing.
It's almost like, well, you and your brother are one of the good ones.
Yes.
So I think it just sort of used to come out of the blue in odd situations growing up.
Yeah.
And then I would be a little bit naively oblivious to stuff the rest of the time.
Yeah. It's kind of like a superpower in a way to get through life. We'll come to that, back to that with the career. And the same at Oxford. I mean, when you went, there can't have been...
No, but I thought, this is the crazy thing, I thought Oxford was quite diverse.
All right.
Like, compared to where I grew up.
Presume
And
it was,
if you imagine, my sixth form college and my school were entirely white, pretty much. And then there were brown and black people in my college in Oxford. So although, I mean, like, looking back on it now and living in London, I'm like, it isn't a particularly diverse university. But for me, it was the first time I'd really had non-white friends ever. So... and I think a lot of them had similar, not entirely, but similar upbringings to me, and that they'd been brought up in predominantly white spaces.
Yeah.
So they felt culturally very similar.
Yeah.
And I think because of my school and because of my sixth form college and where I grew up, I didn't struggle at Oxford. I loved it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, there's no hairdresser in Oxford. Well, there was no hairdresser back home either.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? I didn't have those cultural barriers to overcome because it felt very familiar.
Yeah. Actually, I've never really thought about it that way, that actually you were progressing.
Yes.
In terms of, weirdly, you're starting literally back in Hampshire, where you're the only, and then you go to Oxford, where I consider, hang on, Oxford doesn't have many people of colour, but compared to where you started, it really does.
Yeah.
And then you go into the world of work, and that's great. So what did your parents want you to be? Obviously, they're incredibly proud of you. You've got all the way to Oxford. I mean, did they have any preconceived ideas of what they wanted you to do and be?
I don't think so. And I think even if they had, they wouldn't have put that on me. And I think that speaks very specifically to their experiences, because I think my mum, being the daughter of Nigerian parents, she was supposed to be an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor.
Yeah.
Those were the only three careers.
Engineer, lawyer, doctor. Yeah, that's right.
And when she went to teachers training college...
Accountant. They do all
She
right.
probably could have been an accountant.
Accountant's okay.
Teacher wasn't one of the list.
No.
And she went to Teachers Training College in Cambridge, which wasn't affiliated with the university then, but is now. And that's how she met my dad. But there are people around where my mum's parents live that were never told what she actually did. So her parents told their neighbours that she went to Cambridge.
Right.
Because they were embarrassed that she was going to become a teacher. So
Really? Wow.
So I think because of my mum's experience, I'm not conscious that she ever put any kind of career expectations on me and my brother. And my dad, bizarrely, because my dad is very, very bright. He was, I think, almost 2 years ahead of himself at school. Mm-hmm. And he was pressured into, you must go to Oxford and Cambridge. He went to Cambridge. You must do maths. So he did maths and didn't really enjoy it. So I think my dad got to Cambridge, suddenly didn't have the weight of expectation on his shoulders anymore, and basically did nothing for 3 years apart from drink and, I think, womanize from the way my mum tells it.
I think I like him.
So he had a great time, but he didn't really love his subject. So I think because he is so bright, he literally borrowed a bunch of papers, did some last minute work and scraped a third, and then went to work for IBM. But I think also because now he does degrees for fun, and I think he's studying all the things that he would have loved to have studied. So he did history, he did military history, he's doing, I think, economics and philosophy at the moment.
Wow.
But I think also, so because he was pushed into studying something he didn't enjoy, both my parents, with my brother and I, have always been like, do the thing that you're interested in or passionate about or that you want to do.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, this whole concept of, I had it with my parents wanting me to be a doctor. My mum still thinks that I'd have been a great doctor. Whatever I do, I'd have been a great doctor. I'm always interested in especially for people who are growing up with from underrepresented groups, let's call it. What is it that you're, well, two questions, right? What is it that you're thankful that your parents taught you now? Maybe you weren't at the time, but that you are now.
Yeah. I think just to have faith in myself and to do what I love and to do what I enjoy. My dad is a serial hobbyist. There are very few things my dad has not taken up at some point in his life, and I have definitely inherited that trait. Okay. But my parents were very embracing of just letting us try stuff when we were younger. So I tried Scottish dancing, I did maypole dancing, I did ballet, I did swimming, I did synchronized swimming. And it was never like, well, you started this, so therefore this is the thing you must do and you must stick with it until you're excellent at it.
Yeah.
It was like, do you know what? You tried it. If it's not the thing for you, great, we'll find something else.
Yeah.
I mean, even the fact that I played 4 different musical instruments kind of growing. I started with the flute. I'm not a flautist.
Yeah.
I just
who is? I think it's a very
know.
odd-looking instrument.
But there was a woman in the 80s who was like, I can't even remember her name, but she used to play at the Barbican. She was like a cool 80s flautist.
Yeah. And there was James Galway. Do you know James Galway?
I don't even remember James Galway.
That's way beyond your time. He was a cool flautist.
So you can be, but yeah. I think I started the flute. It wasn't for me. I started the piano. Wasn't for me. And then I ended up playing classical guitar and oboe, and those were my kind of 2 instruments. But again, my parents were like, try things.
Yeah.
And I really think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that they taught me. Like, experiment and find the thing that you enjoy. But also, it's fine to want to do lots of things.
Yeah. You
don't have to pick the one thing, and that's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot. Do you know much about growth mindset?
Yes.
It was one of my kids' schools that were big into growth mindset, got me kind of obsessed with it. And that's one of the things, don't be scared to try things and be bad at them.
Yes.
Because everyone starts being bad at something and you'll never master it unless you start with being bad, and don't feel bad about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've noticed in a lot of people I've been speaking to, this whole growth mindset thing, it comes up in normal language, but that's what you're just talking about, right? You have a growth mindset.
Yeah. And I think just that ability to just sort of go off and do things. It's almost like, okay, well, this sounds interesting, so I'm just going to, unless there's something physically stopping me from doing it, I'll find a way to do it.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm always interested in is what your parents told you about how hard you'd have to work being a person of colour, or did they? Right?
They didn't.
Right.
And I think I'm trying to remember if I had this conversation with them, because actually race is one of those things I've really only discussed with them as an adult. Mm-hmm. I don't remember it really coming up growing up. And I'm pretty sure they made a conscious decision not to have that chat with me.
Yeah.
So and in some ways, I think it's probably benefited me more than held me back, in that I didn't feel like I had that to overcome.
Yeah.
So my parents never told me you're going to have to work twice as hard to be thought of as half as good, or people are going to look at you if you're the only black face in the room.
Yeah.
So I haven't had that voice in my head.
Yeah.
I've probably been quite oblivious to things that have happened as a result. But I kind of think, on balance, given the environment where I grew up and where I ended up at university and the career I went into, it probably helped me.
Is that, do you think, because you had, because we're all privileged, right? You had a reasonably privileged background.
Absolutely. I mean, because there's a certain, and I think that's also been a realization I'm older, that one, I am mixed race, so I do have lighter skin, and there's a huge amount of privilege that comes with that, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And also, I'm very middle class. I sound middle class. I sound home counties. So I think there's an element
because you are.
Because I am. And I think there's an element of, and I sometimes I can see it happening where people look at me, but then they hear me speak, and it's almost, oh, but you sound like me.
Yes.
And I can almost see a whole set of assumptions disappear.
Yeah.
Because the way I speak and the way I come across and the fact that I'm middle class kind of takes a lot of that away.
Yeah.
So I think I've benefited from not having that internal mindset. Yeah, you're right, because I have a huge amount of privilege.
Yeah.
That's just, unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, but on the opposite side, you have things that hold you back. Colour still a thing that holds you back. Being female is something that holds you back. We're all in different positions when it comes to privilege. I mean, the key is, what do you see and what don't you see, and how does that affect your mindset? And clearly for you, it was your parents instilled this amazing confidence in you. The reality is, you went to good school, then you went to Oxford. That's a great start to life. It's a great way forward. So thinking forward a bit about your career. So you go to Oxford. What was your first proper job? How did you get into it, and why?
It's I talk about falling into my first proper job, which I think slightly undermines the effort I put into getting it. But I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be the next David Attenborough. That was my kind of goal when I was younger.
Because you did biology at Oxford?
I did biological sciences. So, and then I kind of narrowed it down to, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I think, really honestly, I just like the idea of working with baby dolphins in Florida.
Doesn't everyone?
I know. Why would you not want to? I was like, I'm going to do a PhD and I'm going to be in the Florida waters with baby dolphins. And then I started my degree. And unfortunately, I hated the kind of animal behavior part of biology.
All right.
And I really loved cellular biology, and I loved plant and animal disease. And unfortunately, where that leads you to in research is not with baby dolphins, but it's, pulling bacteria out of the deep freeze in the lab. And the fact that they didn't like when I made the mwahaha noise every time I did it, I thought maybe a career in research is just not the way to go. And also, the people who worked in the labs just weren't extroverts.
Yeah.
And I'm quite an extrovert. So I was sort of, and I think the problem with Oxford is there's sort of the typical milk round is a lot of investment banks and management consultancy firms. And I knew that didn't appeal to me. But L'Oreal were one of the companies that went round, and I thought, oh, marketing, that sounds a bit more up my street. And so I actually went to the talk. It sounded interesting. Actually went and talked to some of the people who work for the company. Plus they gave you free shampoo.
I know.
And you're a student. So I'm like, well, this is great. So I literally applied to do their graduate scheme because I was like, I need some interview practice, because everyone was applying. There was the whole thing of applying and interviewing and going to recruitment days. And I thought, well, I should get some of that under my belt.
Yep.
But I'd already decided to go traveling with a friend.
Okay.
So I was like, this is just a practice, a rehearsal. And at some point in my year out, maybe I'll have an epiphany and figure out what I actually want to do with my life.
It's like a free hit. There's nothing better than going to an interview process when you think, this is like a free hit.
Yeah. So I had a great time. I was like, this is great experience, and I'm doing the test. This is great experience. I got to the assessment day and I thought, well, this is great experience. I remember turning up and everyone else was in suits. And I was wearing a bright red jumper and a pencil skirt, which bizarrely was much more like the people at L'Oreal dressed.
You're right.
But I could see everyone looking at me going, why do you think you're here?
Yeah.
And I thought it was great. And they had all these games and these activities. So I had a blast. And then they gave you this massive goodie bag at the end. So I was just really excited that I got some free shampoo, some free fragrance and lipstick.
A nice lunch.
Great lunch, free breakfast. In fact, I remember telling the recruitment consultants that they should have pointed out that they were going to lay on breakfast, because if you're a student, you don't want to pay for food in the train station when you're going to get it for free.
100%, right?
So I was really not in the mindset of how am I creating a really good opinion of myself for the people I want to work for. But I think I got to the end of the assessment day and I was like, actually, this would be a fun job to do and this would be a nice place to work. But I was taking a year out.
Yeah.
So I remember, I think I got the contact details for someone who worked there and I sort of messaged them and I said, I just don't, like, do I tell them?
Yeah.
And she was like, no. She was like, wait till they offer you the job because then they want you and then you can negotiate.
Great bit of advice for everybody.
Which was really good advice. So I had the final interview, by which point I was bricking it because I kind of wanted the job.
Yeah, yeah.
So I remember being really nervous about the final interview. And then when they offered it, there was this really awkward moment because it was on a phone call. I was like, great. So I need to start in 12 months' time.
Yeah.
And then there was this weird period where they kept sending me my contract and said, well, just sign your contract and then we'll see if we can defer it. And I kept saying, I'm not going to sign a contract until you confirm you're deferring it. So there was a bit of a standoff for 4 weeks. And I wrote a couple of letters explaining how my year traveling was going to make me a more enriched
and rounded
human being.
Absolutely.
And eventually they sent me a contract starting a year later.
Oh, wow.
But I think I was able to play hardball because I'd already committed to the year out.
Yeah.
So for me, that was my commitment. And I think also, you know, it was a different time. It was 2001 where, you know, it was before the financial crisis where as a graduate, and especially if an Oxbridge graduate, you were like, everyone's going to give me a job. You know, if that had been later, maybe I'd have been more like, I need to lock this job down while I have an offer. But I think there was a certain arrogance of Oxbridge graduates at the time that you would get a job. So
Not just at the time.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things people also say is, and arrogance, confidence, whatever.
Yeah.
You feel self-belief.
Yes. There was no, and I think also because the economy was in a very different place, there was no doubt that as a graduate, there wasn't going to be a job at a corporation waiting for you. You just had to find the right one. There was also that sense. So I think that gave me the confidence, shall we say, to play hardball.
Yeah. So you go traveling, have a great time.
Yeah.
Where did you go?
I did Rally International. So I was in the middle of nowhere in Patagonia in Chile. I went backpacking through Central America with a friend and South America for a bit afterwards. So, yeah.
Wow, great experience, you know. You come back, you start at L'Oreal, and I'm not going to fast forward, but I'm thinking about what were the most significant things as you fast forward through your career that happened, and how did they happen, and why did they happen?
So L'Oreal was a really great place to start my career in marketing. Mm-hmm. I think because it's quite I won't say brutal place, but it gives you there's a whole load of things that just don't faze me.
Yeah.
As a result. And there's very much a play hard, work hard ethic. So I really enjoyed L'Oreal. Things got a bit weird for me, specifically to do with race towards me leaving. And I think I had planned to take another year traveling.
How many years later was that?
So that was 5 years.
Okay.
So basically I was at L'Oreal and I decided quite early on that I couldn't cope with the idea of my working life stretching out before me. I was like, I need a break somewhere. So I was like, I'm going to work for 5 years, then I'm going to go traveling again. So that was in my head. And then while I was at L'Oreal, they were planning to launch this brand called Mazzani that they'd bought. So it was a big black African-American brand in the US. It was a professional brand, so found in salons. And they wanted to launch it in the UK. And I genuinely think what they did is they looked around and went, oh, we're going to have to talk to black hairdressers. This isn't going to look very credible. We need someone black to be running this brand. And they looked around the entire organization and said, we've got 2 black people. One of them's in the professional division. One of them's in the consumer division. Great, Claire's going to do it. So I was quite junior at the time. So in one way, it gave me a huge opportunity, all this exposure. I was almost like a very mini general manager. And but then because it wasn't like one of the big brands, I had to kind of borrow people's time. So I had to borrow a bit of someone's finance time. I had to borrow a bit of someone in customer service. So there was this great opportunity, but it started to feel like a bit of a mill around my neck, like a stone around my neck. because I wanted to get promoted.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I was only doing this for 50% of my job. The other 50% of my job was being a senior brand manager in a part of the business that my predecessors had been two men that had done it for 100% of their time and had a more senior job title and got paid more than me. Mm-hmm. So I was already feeling like, but I'm doing their job for less money, for a less senior title, and I'm running a brand in the other 50% of my time. This feels a bit crazy. So I was being worked very hard and was getting quite stressed out with the whole thing.
Were you worried at any point that it's because of your race or the fact you're a female?
Both. Right. And the racing became apparent when there was a job that I really wanted, which was a step up. And L'Oreal, you didn't apply for jobs. There was a discussion in closed rooms. They decided who they gave it to, and then you got taken into a room.
That's the game. That is the game.
So there was no transparency. And I knew that was the game. But so when the job got announced, I sort of said to my boss, I really wanted that role. And I really wanted that role. Was my name even in the ring? She's like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. Your name was one of the ones we discussed. But we decided that actually the business needs you where you are right now.
The classic.
And I looked around and because I know how they thought about this brand and me running this brand. And I was like, I just genuinely thought, you are never going to move me off this brand because you don't have anyone else black to take my place.
Yeah.
And I started to think, how many job promotions am I going to lose out on?
But it wasn't that your race was stopping you getting the next job more than it was tying you.
It was tying me to my current job.
Right.
And I started to become genuinely worried about that. And I was already planning to take a year out, but it definitely was a factor in me deciding not to take a sabbatical and go back. And I think it was slightly confirmed when I left because I put the business into a bit of a panic when I left, which one made me realize genuinely how much they valued me, which would have been more useful to know while I was actually working for them.
It always is, though.
Always is the case. But they realised, one, they had to recruit two people to do my job because they couldn't expect one person to do what I'd been doing. And I was like, well, guys, I've been trying to tell you this for 6 months. But also they went into a bit of a panic about the fact they didn't have someone black to replace me on Mazzani. And they felt they couldn't recruit overtly for someone of colour. And there was no one else in the business.
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, okay, well, that says a lot.
Yeah.
And I think part of their panic in wanting to keep me was to do with my race, because I genuinely think they had identified me as, oh, she's good, but also she's good and she's black, so it's going to look great on paper. And I found that really irritating.
Was this the first time, and maybe not the last, where actually you thought, hang on, because you've had this really great, growing up experience and through to Oxford, and probably haven't encountered real issues holding you back or holding you
not that I was aware of,
or not that you not that you were overtly aware of. And now in the real working environment, you get to your first one. They're like, how did that make you feel? Or
frustrated. And I think it helped that I had made the decision to go traveling before this was happening. So I think part of me could park it a little bit. Because I was in the mindset, well, look, I'm going to go traveling for a year. I'm going to have an amazing time. And I wasn't even sure if I was going to stay in marketing when I came back, because I'd sort of fallen into marketing. It hadn't been an active choice. So also that year traveling was a little bit for me to work out what I wanted to do. So I think part of me felt this has been annoying and frustrating, but because I'm not 100% sure that this is my career and this is my path, I don't need to stress about it too much. So I kind of just parked it.
Okay.
Pushed it to one side and went off to Argentina.
Sort of rationalised. Good idea. Right. Kind of rationalised it in the context of where it was. Move on, sort of thing.
But I do remember it being frustrating. And I also, because I was very aware of being a little bit of a corporate poster child when I was at L'Oreal.
Yeah.
And obviously in the best way, they want to present the company as being diverse and open. But I used to argue with HR to say, you're going to universities that aren't particularly diverse, and that's where you do all your recruitment. But also pointing out to them, you didn't do a good job in getting me. Because I grew up in a white area. I went to all the schools that everyone else went to. I went to the same university that all your other graduates went to. I'm very culturally British. Like, you didn't break any molds by bringing me into this company. I am just a little bit of an anomaly.
But they didn't probably think of you like that anyway.
No.
They probably just thought you're just like everyone else.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking we need to diversify the group. They were like, hey, you fit, and bonus, or I don't know, I can't speak for them. But
it's when every time they do a shoot for their new corporate brochure,
you end up being in it.
You end up being in it with the one other South Asian girl that worked there.
Yeah.
And every time someone from like head office who was very senior in HR came to do random interviews, we were always the two that were randomly selected. And then a lot, every time they did the recruitment, the milk round, they were very keen that I went.
Yeah, obviously.
It was just, I felt like I was trotted out a lot.
Yeah, and I think that happens to a lot of, I was going to say senior, definitely happens to senior people of colour, but emerging talents,
Yes.
probably even more so, because they're less in control of what they do or don't do, which is interesting.
But I wasn't aware of, I guess, the positive benefits on the other side.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as if they were like, oh, we need to like sponsor you and mentor you and make sure that I felt like I was just doing my own thing. I wasn't aware that there were any positive things coming my way because of that.
I mean, one of the things that we're looking at is the sort of resilience element. So that's the start of your resilience. Did you have any other times in your career, generated by this or otherwise, where you thought, actually, this hasn't gone the way I want, and you had to show that sort of deep down resilience?
Yeah, so I had a really big ego shock, I think is probably the best way of putting it. So this was when I was about 30, I think, 31. And I'd been working for Estee Lauder companies for about 5 years. And I was head of marketing at Aveda, which was a great brand to work for. Really loved it. But
we use that in our house.
Products are amazing. Working for Aveda is a bit like working for a cult in the best possible way.
Yeah, I get it.
I loved it. I still love the brand. And they have headquarters in Minneapolis, which I had to go to in February. That was less fun because it was minus 20 degrees.
Very cold.
But a really good experience. But after 3.5 years, I was sort of wanting my next progression, step up, a change. I get bored easily, and I know that's something about myself. So I'd started to look outside, and I ended up working for a jewelry startup. That's the job I got. And I think I hadn't really anticipated what it's like working for someone whose name is on the door.
Right.
Which is very different. A founder.
Yeah.
Very different from working in a corporate environment. And while there is a huge amount of freedom you get with that, I felt more micromanaged in that role than in any other place I'd worked. So I was struggling a lot with it. And my partner, I think, spotted it way before I did, because on paper it was like, this was my dream job. So I was like, I need to make this work because it's jewelry. I love jewelry. It's a great job. It's a great salary. It's all this freedom. And I'm at the beginning of something that's going to be huge. Yeah. And then I think a couple of months in, I remember they didn't have anyone in HR, but they had a sort of an HR consultant. And I was talking to her about my team, and I thought we were having a follow-up discussion about my team. And she calls me into the meeting and she said, okay, you're absolutely doing the job that they've hired you to do. So I was like, okay, well, that's good.
It's an interesting start to a conversation.
Yeah, when you're like, I feel this is like,
somewhere.
It's not me, it's you conversation coming up. And she said, but actually the two women who run the company have decided that's not the job they need doing anymore. So we're going to let you go. And I didn't see it coming.
Wow, totally blindsided.
Totally blindsided. And I think having talked to people latterly or since then, it's not uncommon for startups to bring someone in for this moment and then to realize actually they need something else.
Sure.
And also I hadn't realized, and this is again something I would scrutinize if I was ever going to go down that route, the 3 people who'd done the job before had all been there for like 4 months, 7 months, 9 months.
Okay.
And the job title had changed every time. So it came out of the blue. I didn't see it coming, and it completely. And I think it was that. And I think because I'd always been very academically successful, and I'd got the job at L'Oreal. I'd got on their graduate scheme. I'd got into Estee Lauder, which was like the epitome of luxury beauty. I think I was used to succeeding, if I'm really honest.
Yeah.
And this was the first time life had turned around and said no.
Yeah, have that big slap in the face.
And I wasn't prepared for it. I really wasn't prepared. And I think maybe if I had more examples of failing at things, even in small ways growing up, I would have had a bit more resilience to it. But it really just literally flattened my ego.
Yeah.
in a way that it took me over the next couple of years. I remember my partner talking about a way I'd reacted to something at Unilever. And he said, I think being made redundant has had a bigger impact on you than you realise.
Yeah.
He's like, because I don't think this would be impacting you in the same way, like if this had happened a couple of years before
Well,
that.
it's not even that. It's actual personal rejection.
Yes. Because it felt really, and it was personal. And I mean, look, in hindsight, I'm very glad it happened when it did, because I would not have been happy in that environment.
Yeah.
I went back to a corporate environment. I felt like I breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, oh, this is a big corporation. I know where I am now. So I think it probably wasn't the right job for me. But at the time, I think not being able to have made that decision on my own terms in my own time.
You're used to the control of that.
And having that taken away from me was a really big shock. And I think also that feeling of, because I kept for years afterwards going, if I had done this differently, would that have made a difference?
Yeah.
Would I have succeeded? So yeah, it was a big shock to the system. But I think, again, in hindsight, I can look back at that and say, I learned a lot of really valuable lessons, but it wasn't pleasant at the time.
No, it never is.
No.
And actually, what you're sort of saying, actually, maybe if it happened to be a bit younger, I'd have been able to cope with it a bit better.
Yeah, I think at the age of 30, it was like
that's going to floor you, right?
Yes.
You know, if you've been rejected and told no from the age of 10 to 15, you're kind of used to it. And so when you get it later on, you kind of...
Because I didn't even have that in the milk round, because like, I think L'Oreal was the only job I applied for, and I got it. So I was a little bit like, I'm one for one.
Yeah.
And I got into Oxford when I applied.
Yeah. So
yeah, it was a very I think it was a lesson I needed to have learned. It just happened quite late in life.
It's going to come, but the thing. So you then join Unilever, right? Hang on, the biggest of the big, right? Which is great, and I'm sure you're doing great there. I want to kind of touch on a bit of that, but also your pivot, the slight pivot that you're on now.
Yeah.
So lots of people get to a certain age, especially people of colour, and think, actually, I've had enough of corporate life and I'm going to go and do something different. Either because it's too hard, or they've met a glass ceiling or concrete ceiling. Your pivot into children's books, is there anything to do with that or not?
Yes and no, a little bit of both. So I definitely got to a point at Unilever. There is a bit of they talk about it as a bit of an internal glass ceiling. So because Unilever is a little bit like the civil service, and everything's very banded in terms of hierarchy. And getting to a director level is very competitive, because all the you get a lot of people at the level below who are all very good, who have a lot of experience. And it can become a little bit political. You need the right sponsor, you need to be showing up in the right way, get the right projects. And I started to become quite disillusioned with that, because it felt like I was banging my head against a brick wall.
Yeah.
I was being told I was great, but not getting interviews, but no one could tell me why.
Yeah.
And also, if I try and look at senior people of colour in Unilever, there aren't a lot in the UK. Well, there aren't a lot of black senior people. There are quite a lot of senior people who are of South Asian descent, because the Indian part of the business is a huge part of Unilever, and a lot of them come and do senior global roles.
Okay.
Which I think a little bit Unilever sometimes looks at itself and says, but we can see loads of brown people around. We don't have a diversity leadership problem.
Yeah.
Without looking at there are different types
Yes.
of diversity. But that's
many within race and within every other.
So I was feeling quite frustrated, and was also working really hard, and again had got to, I think, had I just turned 40 as well? So it was a bit
nice
of a
milestone.
Yeah, you start, and I had a 18-month-old son. So, and your priorities do shift when you're wiping someone's bum as well as trying to climb the corporate ladder.
Nicely put.
That's terrible. There's more to parenting than just wiping bums, but for many years it seems to be the main one.
That's a clip if ever I've heard one.
So I think I was starting to feel quite frustrated, and one of my friends, actually a girl I used to be in an a cappella choir with, used to work in marketing, now lives in the middle of nowhere in an island and is a life coach.
Right.
And we were catching up, and our catch up started to turn into a little bit of a life coaching session. And I said, look, and we were like, okay, this is maybe crossing a line. And she said, well, look, write me a LinkedIn review and I'll give you a free hour of life coaching. So I was like, great. And I think because she knows me so well, she did that great thing of just asking me a lot of annoying questions I didn't want to answer.
Yep.
But what came out of it is I realized the one thing I needed was time to figure out what I actually wanted to do, which I think when you're juggling being a parent for the first time, working full time, it's not like I could spend my weekends sitting in a cafe having a think about my career.
No.
Because they were family time, which was great, but I didn't have much headspace, and the job I was in wasn't giving me any headspace. So I ended up taking advantage of something which was great at Unilever, which was this flexible working scheme they had called UWork. Mm-hmm. And it was a little bit of a proactive decision to just take myself out of the whole corporate rat race, which was also a bit of a risk. But I was like, look, I can go back in. Like I've just sidestepped. But if I want to just jump back in when I figure out what I want to do, that's fine. So it felt like quite a low risk way.
That comes with your confidence as well, though.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Like, I'll do that. Because you feel very confident you can just always get another job. Yeah.
And it wasn't as risky as, let's say, quitting my job.
Yeah.
I'm still at Unilever. I'm still employed by them. I'm still technically on the payroll. I'm just hiring myself out on a project basis, which means I can work 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So I then started working with my friend as a life coach. And I thought was going to try and get to a point of working out what I wanted to do career-wise. Did I want to become a consultant, become freelance, do something completely different? And through that, actually found out that so one of the benefits that came out of that is I was able to hire myself to some of the people in the company that I really valued and really respected and were really bright. So I found myself working on projects that actually I was really enjoying because it was more on a strategic basis. So I was going more into a strategy space. I was sort of taken out of the day-to-day politics a little bit, which in a corporate life is brilliant.
Heaven.
I suddenly wasn't getting 150 emails a day. I was saying, all this crap, I just don't have to deal with anymore. Yeah. And actually being able to spend whole days just thinking about things, which just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So I was suddenly like, actually, it kind of gave me a new lease of life in marketing. I found a part of my job that I was really loving. And I was only having to do it 3 days a week.
Perfect.
And I flippantly said, I'd love to do this, but, I'm still taking 20% less home. So financially, this is not sustainable in the long term. And I was sort of going back to this children's book that I started writing. And I sort of said to my life coach, well, ideally, I'd want to get myself promoted, do the 3 days a week at a higher salary, and then I can write 2 days a week. And she was like, great, let's make that happen. I was like, no. No, that was just an off-the-cuff thing. She was like, that's the first time you've really articulated what it is you want to do. And then an opportunity came up where I was able to say for the person I was working to, I want to continue working for you, but this is what I need it to look like. And I think I needed the 6 months of life coaching to be able to have that conversation. And she was like, yeah, great. And so I managed to get myself in a situation where I was doing something I really liked, getting paid and recognized at the level I felt I should have been at.
Yeah.
And then I had 2 days a week to try and make this whole children's book happen. So it wasn't planned, but I suppose I gave myself the time and headspace to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I ended up somewhere I didn't think I was going to end up, but then was really happy where sort of things ended up. So I've kind of made this pivot, and actually through that, have now given myself to the answer to a question that I've never had an answer to before, which is, what would you do with your time if you won the lottery and didn't have to work? And you could do anything. And I've never had an answer to that question.
All right. The children's book thing never came in even when you thought that?
No, because I'd never thought I wanted to be a children's author. It was only when I got an idea that wouldn't leave me alone that I was like, now I want to write a book. And now I've done it. This has now become a huge thing that I'm really passionate about, and I've got more ideas and I want to continue. So now if I won the lottery tomorrow, this is what I would spend all my time doing. Wow. But I never thought that would be the answer to this question.
Yeah. I think people, do you know what? I was just thinking about it. I was thinking, what would my answer be? I'm going to build this into the podcast. When you get £1 million and you win the lottery, what actually would you do with your time? So children's books for you was the way to go.
But if you'd asked me 5 years ago,
probably wouldn't have been the answer.
No.
Yeah, no. I suppose we all go through different life phases where different things will be the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot. You've pivoted. You've worked with some of the biggest companies in the world, actually.
Yeah.
And you've done it as a mixed-raced woman, right? So, $1 million question, do you think bias, and you've done well, so what's your feeling about whether bias in selection or any other form exists in the workplace? And if the answer is yes, what should we do to fix it?
So I know it exists because I remember talking to a recruitment consultant when I came back from traveling, and obviously my name doesn't signal that I'm
Correct,
that I'm black or mixed race, and that's one of the reasons my parents chose it. But he said, you need to put your photo on your CV. So I said, oh, why? He said, well, you've got a strong CV, but the fact that you're black will only help.
Will help?
Yes, because at the time, he felt that companies were scrabbling around a little bit to bring more diversity in. And I think the benefit, unfortunately, of me is that on paper, I look like everyone else they're probably going to employ anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm also black.
Bonus.
So I felt a little bit uncomfortable at the time because it felt like I was, trying to use something slightly unfair to my advantage. So I almost saw it as a little bit of like I was getting an unfair leg up through being black.
Because it's aligned to the fact that you've already achieved things that your typical person of colour won't have achieved.
Yes.
Middle class, great school, great degree, Oxford. That's all. It's like in the privilege stakes, you've just like gone to the top. And this thing, which would be like something that would be negative for most of us, was like even an additional factor for you.
Yeah, and I felt so because of that conversation and because of that comment, if I knew nothing else, that would tell me there is some kind of bias. But then at the same time, I've seen too much of it happening the other way,
Right.
or holding people back. And even just I look at all the companies I've worked for, there were very few black leaders in any of those companies. And if they were definitely unicorns. Mm-hmm. So, and I remember there was one moment I was working on a project which actually had to do with race-based hair discrimination, which is probably why
Back to hair.
Yes, but so I got to work against back to hair, which was good. But there was a girl that had specifically asked to be on this project because she felt very passionately about it. There was me and the global team, and then there was, I think, probably the only black senior brand manager in the UK business at the time. And the three of us in COVID were on a call together. And there was this moment when we all came up on Zoom or Teams or whatever it was, that we all paused. And I knew exactly why we all paused. Because I said, I think this is the first time in my entire career I've been in a meeting or on a call with entirely black people.
In a senior meeting? Or any meeting?
Any meeting. Wow. Any meeting. Yeah. And it was the same for them as well. And they were more junior to me and younger than me. But it was just the three black faces on the screen made us all pause because we'd never seen it before.
Brilliant. And I tell you, it might be a while till you see it again.
Yeah.
So why? What do we need? What needs to happen?
I started off, I remember thinking I want to mentor people within the company because, that feels like something I should be doing. And I think then I realized that actually, because I don't think companies and corporations are doing enough to bring black talent through the doors, I sort of got to the point of saying I need to go outside to really make a difference. And I think it is a societal problem. And I think it starts in school, really. So it's why I'm a governor of a primary school. Okay. It's why I wrote a children's book that is aimed at 7 to 11-year-olds. Because I think it needs to be tackled from all ends. But I think if it doesn't start at a very young age, you're just putting sticking plasters on a bigger societal issue. But it's one of the reasons when I was looking at mentorship, I got involved with the Amos Bursary. Because I think what they're doing in identifying...
Can you tell us a bit about that for anyone who doesn't know?
So the Amos Bursary, it started as a way of trying to level the playing field for black boys in education and in university. So it gives them access to a lot of things that I guess other kids get through privilege that they probably take for granted. So internships, mentorships, just the idea that they get used to walking through the doors of an HSBC or a L'Oreal or a Unilever and feel comfortable in that environment. And then they opened it up to girls a couple of years ago, which is when I got involved. So they just give them, I guess, just a lot of the opportunities and exposure that their white counterparts probably get. And I think it started with black boys specifically because they have a level of prejudice and discrimination against them, especially in the professional workplace versus their counterparts. They tend to have low educational outcomes. So, but I think because I'm a woman, I was particularly interested when they started opening up to be able to mentor girls. So the girl I mentor, who is amazing, did very well at A-level. She is at Oxford at the moment studying English literature, but she's got the opportunity. She's done loads of different internships with amazing companies as a result of being involved through Amos. And she has 2 different mentors that she can reach out to throughout this as well.
And so what, I always ask people, what message would you give? But you're doing it. So what message do you give her? And not just people who are going to go to us, anyone of colour, what from your career and from your heart, what message would you give to them? Seeing as you chose, well, you weren't given the advice you have to work harder.
Yeah.
And I presume you're not going to give that to your own children.
No. So
what message do you send from here to young people of colour at the start of their career?
So it's a bit of a counter-programming message, which is going to sound crazy, but I think a lot of this generation of colour that are being brought up are still being pushed towards certain careers. And I get why, because especially if they come from poor backgrounds, like actually earning a decent salary or earning a lot of money is really, is important. And I'm not going to tell anyone they shouldn't want to earn money, but I do think there's a broader range of careers that are available that still have great salaries. But I do feel there's still this emphasis on being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an investment banker. And I think because I've come from a more creative point of view, I'm keen to just understand what it is they're passionate about and what it is they really enjoy, and make sure that they're aware that there are other options. So, for example, the girl I mentor, who is great, is a really talented poet and loves slam poetry. And she's very determined that she's going to be a lawyer, which, and I'm not going to tell her not to be a lawyer, but I do like to talk to her about other creative opportunities and industries. But I'm also like, make sure you keep up the poetry, because I think it's something that makes her really happy, and I think it's something she really loves. And I don't want her to lose that in the kind of corporate grind, if that makes sense.
So is it, because you were told do something you love, right, by your parents?
Yes.
Is that what you're telling others? Because we can get caught up in the money thing, and it's kind of annoying.
Yeah.
That people think, oh, I love poetry, but I need money, so I'm going to be a lawyer. Whereas you kind of think, actually, do something you love. I love this adage: do something you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's kind of what I told my kids. Is it down that sort of vein that you're saying?
It is and it isn't, because I think there's also a danger of, because I think I was presented with that you should do something you love and you never work. So I think a lot of my life I've been chasing this holy grail career. And I think and actually one of the places I got to in the last couple of years is realizing that I can have a job that I really enjoy and I get a lot out of. It doesn't give me everything I need. And it's fine that it doesn't give me everything I need. It's fine that I have aerial slings and being a children's author that fulfill the other things that I need to be my full happy self.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of my life, I felt like my career had to do everything. So I think there's a danger in presenting career as the holy grail as well.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of find a job that you enjoy and you get a lot from, but also look at the other passions that you have that can also be a big part of your life as well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. My son calls them side quests. I love that term.
Side quests is great.
Like, Dad, you're on another side quest. I'm like, yeah, I'm on another side quest. This is cool. To have a job and have side quests.
So I've got a very time-consuming side quest at the moment. But actually, it was really interesting. I actually through TikTok, which is crazy. I never expected to meet people in real life that I befriended on TikTok. But there's a fantastic.
That happens?
I know, it does.
Right.
But there's a wonderful girl called Kirsten who befriended me on TikTok. And she's a self-published children's author. She writes these amazing kind of diverse, inclusive children's books.
Sounds good.
And she also works for EY.
Right.
And she said, well, I love my job and I do my job 4 days a week. But she's like, my career is being a children's author. So she's like, when I look at what is the thing I stay up till midnight doing, what is the thing I invest extra time and money in, it's my career. And she's like, it's not that I don't enjoy my job. I love it. but my career is a children's author, even if I only officially have one day a week to do that. And I really liked that way of thinking.
That's a really great way of framing it, isn't it? You know, it's the work to live type thing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm working to do my career, which is his other thing.
Yeah.
You know, cool. Last question. We've covered so much sort of ground. Generally positive. Give us, you know, some reason to be hopeful.
I think there are a lot of reasons to be hopeful. I mean, even if I look around the companies I'm in today, things are a lot better than they were 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think at least because corporations have acknowledged the job that they need to do. They may not be doing it entirely, or they may not be doing it as well as they should be, but I think at least they recognise there is an issue. And they recognise they need to take action. And there's a fantastic WhatsApp group I'm in, which is, I think it's just called Black in FMCG. And it was started by, I think, a girl at Diageo, who actually seemed to be doing a lot of really positive stuff from what I see in the WhatsApp group. Yeah. But so this is a really thriving WhatsApp group of just Black professionals in FMCG, supporting each other, networking, calling out jobs, talking about experiences. Yeah. And I don't think that would have existed 10, 15, 20 years ago.
No.
So I think there's a lot of people doing a lot to create communities and support systems and mentorships. A girl I'm friends with who I met at Unilever called Lacelli has got this great organisation called the Ladder Club, because it's all about Black women sending a ladder down to other Black women. Nice. So I think, you know, there's a lot of reasons to be positive, because there's a lot more people that are willing to invest time and energy. But I do think there is still a lot of structural barriers and mindset barriers that still need to be broken down. And I think it's particularly a British problem, in that we still really don't like to admit that racism is the issue it is.
Yeah.
Like in America, I feel like they're aware it's a problem.
Yeah, it's a different problem, though.
It's a different problem, but I feel like we're a little bit British about it. They're like, well, no one's throwing a brick in my window, so is it really racism?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there are lots of companies who are doing the right things, thinking the right way. There's a long way to go, you know, but every journey starts with steps, and I think you're right. There's some awareness and people taking steps, and I think if we can just make sure that continues to happen, I think the problem is how long.
It's slow. And I think that's where I get a little bit frustrated, that things don't. And I think there's this feeling that things continue to increase at the same rate of change. And I remember after, I think it's the 4-year anniversary since George Floyd was murdered. And there was a whole flurry of things moving and changing, because I think companies were forced to do it. And I think a lot of that momentum has slowed and stalled. And that's frustrating to see, because that felt like a bit of a watershed moment. Yeah. So it's really frustrating when you see things become a bit more performative and tick box than maybe they were in the wake of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's a way to go, but we're on the right sort of thing. And people like yourself and myself really need to kind of try and make that happen. Look, Claire, it's been amazing having you on. We could go on. We could definitely, between two of us, we'd definitely go on. But I think it's been amazing learning about you, what it's like growing up, and your career. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
With your proper career,
which is now being a children's. Oh, the only thing I wanted to add, actually, so one of the wonderful things about being a children's author is you get to go into schools.
Yes.
So, and the fact that I get to go into schools as a Black woman. And it's a bit, obviously I've had a very privileged upbringing, but I think for the kids, especially kids that are Black and brown, to see someone who is a children's author that wrote a book that they can at least have maybe identify with more than maybe other authors is a big thing. So, you know,
I'm a great believer. That's why I do this podcast, See It, Be It. You know, it doesn't matter how you got there, you're doing it, you're aspirational, you're a great role model. You know, it seems the right sort of thing to finish the podcast on. So good luck.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic having you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I can't wait to read your next children's book. I know it sounds a bit weird, but I can't wait. Thanks.
Thank you.